Hi, I'm Peter Dialag, and we're here in Steve Sherman's teaching darkroom. We're a little bit early for our interview, but let's see what Steve's up to. You got to look at this. This is the guest bedroom for students for the workshops that he does that are either out of state or out of country. You got to take a look at this. All right, so we're entering the darkroom, and Steve, hi, it's Peter. Are we interrupting anything?
Hi, Peter. No, not at all. Always nice to see you.
Thank you very much. What are you working on?
I just got a couple of prints that I'm toning, and I match it up against a master print that I like very much, and I'm just gauging the final subtle tones.
Fantastic. Looks beautiful. So Steve, I know we're here for an interview. I had a few more questions.
Sure.
Is it okay? You got a few minutes so we can sit down and
Sure.
go over them?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Steve, thank you very much for speaking with us and interviewing you about your photographic process, which is the Steve Sherman Power of Process workshops
Right.
and photographic workshops. We've been making some short videos for your process, and we've been sharing a few with the public. But what is it that you hope to accomplish with these videos, Steve?
Well, I believe that my process is rather unique in that I've developed some techniques myself, and I've explored, I think, the multi-contrast end of enlarging paper to a degree that maybe hasn't been explored to date. So I'm interested in sharing my process over the next several years. I'm going to share the entire process with the public. Some will be free videos, and there'll be some videos, there'll be a small amount of charge for those videos. But it will be my entire process.
Steve, why do you feel your silver prints are substantially different from other elite printers that are out there currently?
That's a good question, Peter. I'm glad that you asked it. I get a fair amount of time in the museums to look at the old masters' work and some of the new contemporary work. And I see in my own prints where the mid-tone contrast is, at least to my aesthetic, is more to my liking. And it's difficult to explain verbally without actually seeing it, but there's just a more tactility to my prints. There's a fellow who I've met before, but there was an unsolicited comment out on the internet floating around that some friends of mine had to tell me about. But this particular fellow, Michael Mitmansky, he's an elite large format photographer himself, and has reviewed in magazines for years and years and years. And he made a statement on the internet that he has seen my work, and he has seen how I've adapted this particular technique of minimal agitation, and in an organic sense, my prints are, his words, the best silver prints he's ever seen by any printer, alive or dead. Wow. That's a pretty profound statement. So, I respond to the way my prints look, and I don't respond so much to the way I see others look. That's not to say that some of the old masters aren't, terrific printers and whatnot. I just think that the materials that are available today offer different approaches to how you can create a sense of depth, create a sense of micro contrast.
So you're saying that with your process you have more control over the outcome of the print?
I do.
Wow.
I do. There's a number of little incremental steps that I use, and each one of those steps is stacked on top of one another, and each one of those steps is targeted at creating a greater micro contrast, a greater mid-tone contrast. I use an analogy in my workshops where I have these pieces of paper. One side of the piece of paper is black, the other side is pure white. I ask the students, what are these? And they don't know. And I tell them these are the finest enlarging papers that are available today. It doesn't mean anything. One side is black, one side is white. We respond to the tones that are in the middle. That's where we form our aesthetic and our visceral response to a photograph. So in my mind, the more edge contrast I can put to something, as long as it remains organic looking. In other words, it's not done with a logarithmic Photoshop function. It's done all organically in a film processing and in a print processing manner. The prints just look more smooth, more subtle, yet more striking in the mid-tone contrast.
Steve, I've had the luxury of taking a couple of your workshops, and one of the most profound things that I can recall being here with another student of yours just recently is that he mentioned that your prints, your photographic flat piece of paper, actually had a feel of actual concrete. It was an image,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually felt like concrete. It didn't just look like a cinder block wall. It felt like a cinder block. Is that what you're referring to that?
I am, and I did that specifically. I did not know that he was going to use those terms, but I'm very glad that he did, because we processed it. We went to a location and we shot a piece of film. We shot actually 2 holders, and we brought them back to the darkroom here, and we processed one of those holders in a traditional continuous agitation in a tray that was done by Ansel Adams and many contemporary photographers today. And we took the exact same scene in the other holder, and we processed it with minimal agitation, the technique that I perfected 12 or 13 years ago. And his response when he saw the final print was something heaven sent. I couldn't have foreseen the adjectives that he used, but he said in the print that was continuously agitated, the film that was continuously agitated, he said that looks like concrete. In the minimally agitated negative, he said that feels like concrete. And I thought to myself, well, that's perfect. That's a perfect way to describe something. Looks, feels. And I mean, these are subtle things, but nevertheless, you know, when you get to a status or a state where these little tiny things matter, you tend to go out of your way to achieve those things, no matter how much work is involved to get those things. So,
well, your work certainly does stand apart, and it has a certain different look and feel to them. So, Steve, share with us a few things that your students or even a seasoned printer can walk away with coming to one of your workshops.
I think the way I approach the split contrast printing has become a very common means to affect a final print with today's multi-contrast papers. It's really the only type of paper that's available today. Is a one single sheet of paper that can produce a full range of contrast. Whereas years ago, you used to buy single grades of paper. There would be a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. And each one of those pieces of paper had a different contrast look to them. So you had to design a negative more specifically to work on those single graded papers. Where nowadays you have the ability to affect contrast, little tiny pockets of contrast throughout the print by changing the color of light, whether it be a green light for soft contrast or a blue light for hard contrast. So one of the things that I think that has helped me streamline my own process is I choose the most difficult part of the print and I design my what I call a contrast formula for that area. So that leaves me other parts of the print that are a little easier to manipulate, whether it be with dodging and burning or cards or any type of flashing or any type of technique. I set the contrast formula, the amount of green light and the amount of blue light that gets mixed together. That's my contrast formula. Now that in some prints that might be a contrast of 3.25. In another print it might be a contrast of 2.40. That's the general contrast that goes across the whole print.
When you're using blue and green light, are you using them in conjunction with one another or separately?
Another good question. Part of the thing that's most difficult for me is this stuff is so second nature to me. It's easy for me to just skip over things that people that are not as familiar with my process don't completely understand. So that's a good question. I print with a green light, a 0 filtration, and a 5 filtration in separate segments, but I never go in between. It's always 0, it's always 5. It's maximum, the maximum amount of soft contrast and the maximum amount of blue contrast. And there's very definite reasons why I don't go up or down the scale. It's a little bit more technical to explain those reasons why, but rest assured, using the extremes will affect the greatest mid-tone contrast, and that's what I'm after.
Wow. How long have you been perfecting this process, Steve?
Well, I mean, I exposed my first roll of film in 1981. To say that I was trying to perfect a process way back then, that would be foolish to say something like that. But I would say right around the turn of the century, right around the year 2000, I began to think that, geez, I've received some very nice compliments from elite photographers, gallery owners. So I began to think that, maybe there was a future, in teaching and in high-level fine art gallery type photography. So I did begin to focus more along the lines of sharing my knowledge with other photographers. But I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, I really turned my attention towards the wording that I use. And lately it's been pretty much one-on-one, two-on-one type of workshops. A gentleman from Argentina came this past year. And I use these times that I'm one-on-one with people to gauge how they respond to the words that I'm using. And several times I've had little post-it notes pasted around the darkroom where I'll stop the lecture, so to speak, because he's asked a question and used a different word than I used, and I realized that the compromise was the word that came up. And I realized the way he interpreted what I was saying, I could make a better explanation by using the word compromise. And so what I'm saying is the last 5 or 6 years, I've really concentrated on how to disseminate my information so that people that don't have my expertise can understand it as easily as I do.
Steve, this all sounds very exciting. Is there any one thing that you could pass on to those who want to grow their own wet process black and white photography?
There is, I do believe there is one core value, two core values to why I've gotten to where I have. And number one is I love the process. I love to come down in the darkroom and experiment. That's not a chore for me to go off on a tangent that may or may not pay dividends. I don't find that disappointing if I'm not successful. I find it as gaining knowledge, and I apply that knowledge. But I think the biggest thing that's led to my success is when I do make a change, I make one change at a time. And I pay very careful attention to what that change has caused. And if it's a change that is in a direction that I like, then I can expand it. Then I can push that limit a little bit more. But it's only one change. I don't change film and then I change development. One change at a time.
Nice, Steve. Thank you. I really do appreciate the time that we spent here together. Is there anything you'd like to add about your videos or your Power of Process blog that you've recently launched?
I do. The blog. The blog is designed to share the videos, and I've had an ongoing monthly story where the segment is called "The Story Behind the Photograph." I found that so many of the photographs that I've made have these very unusual stories behind them, and I found other photographers get a lot of enjoyment out of reading these stories. Sometimes they're a little longer than they should be. This past, the one that kicked off the blog, I think was 13 or 1400 words. They won't all be that long, but in the interest of full disclosure, my intention is to pass on my process to everyone. But at the same time, it's going to take several years, in bi-weekly or monthly videos to pass on that process. I'm projecting 30 to 40 videos, hopefully under 2 minutes. But I would be disingenuous if I didn't say, if there are people out there that would like to take a workshop, come to my home one-on-one, or the ultimate end goal of these 30 to 40 videos would be an online mentorship program where someone would subscribe to me and enter into a financial arrangement where I would share videos on a timed basis. And then those students could absorb that information and go out and practice that particular end of the video a little bit more before the next video came. That's a little bit more allows the photographer, the student, a little bit more freedom than coming to me for a 3-day workshop. Several photographers have come to me for 3-day workshops. There's a lot of information that I pass on to them in those 3 days, but nevertheless, that's the option that they chose. The online sharing of the videos would be another option that might take 6 months to a year.
Steve, thank you very, very much for your time. This process, it looks and feels very, very exciting. I can't wait to learn more about it, and I'm sure that the viewers at home are looking forward to learning more as well. Steve, thank you very much. Steve Sherman, the Power of Process Workshops. How can we get a hold of you, or how can a student get a hold of you?
You can go to my website, Steve. My email address is steve@steve-sherman.com. There's now Steve Sherman powerofprocess.com. There's powerofprocesstips.com, which is the blog, which is going to be coming out certainly every first of the month. Whether I can put a little bit more in between those two will depend a lot on timing and just how good I am in front of the camera. I'm pretty comfortable behind the camera. In front of the camera, not so much.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you.